Tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow creeps in this petty pace from day to day to the last syllable of recorded time. And all our yesterdays have lighted fools the way to dusty death. Out, out, brief candle. Life's but a walking shadow, a poor player that struts and frets his hour upon the stage, and then is heard no more. It is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. Yeah, my background is one of being illiterate.
Okay.
When I went to prison, I had a standard 6 education, like grade 8.
Yes.
I had never heard of Shakespeare. So when I was allowed to study,
Yes.
it was the first time that I encountered Shakespeare. Part of my syllabus was to know certain aspects of Shakespeare, and Macbeth, Romeo and Juliet, and others. And to me, Shakespeare was a voyage of discovery. It was the first time I read plays and poems and poetry with such depth, and I was really in awe. As a matter of fact, on one occasion we put in the play of Julius Caesar, and I was Mark Antony, played as Earl Mark Antony. This to me was a big voyage of discovery. But Shakespeare, in spite of my shallow understanding of blank verse and poetry and plays,
Yes.
I found it gripping. I found it embracing. And I chose Macbeth. There are many other passages I could have chosen, but I love Macbeth because in a final analysis, it is so true. In a final analysis, we all strive to build up our little kingdoms
Yes.
with our families, do the best for our families, and try and do the best for our country. And but in 50 years' time, we are no more. We're forgotten.
Yes.
You take people like Julius Caesar, he's still remembered. But how many other people with Julius Caesar are remembered?
Yeah.
And in time to come, Julius Caesar too will be forgotten.
Yeah, sure.
And that is life. We only have the greats who are remembered. Jesus,
Yes.
Moses, Winston Churchill, Hitler. And you remember, and of course Shakespeare, you remember these people because they're the highlights. But can you imagine all the other millions of people who passed away unnoticed?
Yes.
But in their own light, in their own right, they had also a little kingdom to look after. But as it says, life's but a walking shadow, a poor player that struts and frets this hour upon the stage, and then is heard no more. It is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury. Of course, it contains many brave episodes. For the way, another great man to be remembered is Nelson Mandela.
Yes.
And it contains life, each father to his family is a hero. Each mother to a family is a heroine, and the children are precious jewels to their parents. But the cycle of life goes on. Birth and death and birth goes on. And after a time, it just is forgotten. Tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow creeps in this petty pace from day to day. And that is our life.
Yeah.
Tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow. And from babyhood we go through life battling, struggling, getting married, getting degrees, getting big bank balance, and then we leave the earth as we came in.
Yes.
With nothing. With nothing. With nothing.
Yes. And what do you think about Shakespeare now, the relevance of him now, especially for young people?
Shakespeare is always relevant in any situation. Shakespeare's got so wide with all his plays. And Shakespeare, I'm amazed at Shakespeare because Shakespeare, I don't know how old he was, but he lived in a time when things were primitive.
Yeah.
And this man, he portrays experiences which he himself has never experienced.
Yeah.
He himself has never experienced the experiences he portrays. He portrays the drunken god, and how he becomes romantic
Yes.
because of his liquor, and he portrays this drunken god. He portrays Mark Anthony standing there on the platform addressing the crowds after Caesar's death. Portrays all the other actors, and not only of Macbeth, but of all the other plays. He portrays Lady Macbeth
Yes.
with a spot of blood on her hand, and this spot of blood is a conscience.
Yeah.
And she eventually goes mad. And these are experiences which he never experienced. I don't think in those days and these days there were books which spoke about the lightness or the heaviness of conscience, but he portrayed it. He portrayed the love of Romeo and Juliet to young people, and the hatred of the families. He portrays it. I think that Shakespeare perhaps never will be forgotten, but it'll take a long, long time before he's forgotten, because his works are so deep and so embracing.
Yes. And because with the other gentlemen that we've interviewed, what had happened is that some of them, like Karasim, just signed on the introduction of the total works of William Shakespeare when Sunny Van Kantaram passed it around. Would you still pick the same code if you're given the same works, or would you pick
Yes.
like different?
No, I'm enchanted by Macbeth. I'm really enchanted, and this passage tomorrow, and tomorrow, it's so true. It's so true. And Shakespeare, I would assume a reasonably young man at that stage, he could portray the insignificance of man, that we are just mere mortals. Eventually we'll turn to dust, and the world will not remember us. We, whilst we were living, we were full of pomp and ceremony, and trying to impress the world. But in the final analysis, we are nothing.
Yeah. It's been 20 years since the unbanning of political prisoners, and everybody's been talking, and many of what Shakespeare depicts, also what many of the other your fellow prisoners picked. Most of them, it meant a particular thing about the 20 years of the unbanning, the release of Mandela and other political prisoners. What does Shakespeare or that particular passage that you chose signify with these 20 years that you are saying now?
It signifies what he says here. 20 years, the unbanning. Will we still remember it in 20 years' time? Or 20 years after? Tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow.
Yes.
And the unbanning, of course, the 20th anniversary of unbanning is a great event in our lives.
Yes.
Because that particular day, 20 years ago, changed the character of our country. And today we look back. But that banning of yesteryear,
yes,
20 years ago, was done in a climate where there was hate and pain and deep sorrow. There was also the wonderful values of those who were fighting the apartheid government at that time. Values of integrity, of justice for all, of dignity. Those values were important for us. 20 years later, those values have not got the same values to others. I've written a book called There and Back, and there's a passage in my book in which I state that there are freedom fighters of yesteryear,
yes,
who swore by the Freedom Charter, who today swear at the Freedom Charter because of the evil corruption. That is the difference between 20 years ago and today. We, in the struggle, we fought for what we believed in, for idealism, for peace, for reconciliation. We fought for dignity, we fought for respect, we fought for integrity. We had no thought of enriching ourselves. Ms. Mandela never thought he'd become president. I did not think I would survive. But we did. Those were our values. Not values of self-enrichment. Not values of greed. Not values of trying to get the best at the expense of another. Our values were good. Today, 20 years later, it cannot be said the same for everybody else. There are good people, yes, very good people, but there are also bad people. And those bad people have cast a shadow on the efforts of those who had died to bring about changes in South Africa.
Because I think it speaks of leadership. Do you think, is there any relevance to Shakespeare in shaping the kind of the ideal leadership that you talk about? Because you say some have lost that path that you strived for, you fought for so hard. But today we see shacks, the same shacks that we said we didn't want. We see the amidst poverty. We have seen new stats that say the difference between the rich and the poor, it's so huge. Pre-94 is still the same up until today.
True.
Is there a significance that Shakespeare can do with the leadership, or a particular quote that you can think of that will say, hey man, don't forget about the past? Because your quote is especially for that.
Yeah, you see, I'm not an authority on Shakespeare. I can't remember all the aspects. Now, who can I think of where Miss Mandela fits in? Now, Miss Mandela is a wonderful man, you know. He is a man who brought us where we are today.
Yes.
Now, a point can be made that when Mr. Mandela was in power, there were shacks.
Yes.
And there's still shacks today. But Mr. Mandela's position was different to the leaders of today.
Yes.
Mr. Mandela had to prevent a backlash from the right wing.
Yes.
The right wing was powerful. He had to bring together enemies of yesterday, bring them together today. People who fought each other to the death the day before,
Yes.
he had to bring peace among them. When Mr. Mandela took power, the old government had looked after 4 million people, 4 million citizens. When Mr. Mandela took power, he had to look after 40 million citizens. Mr. Mandela had to keep peace between the have-nots and the haves,
Yes.
because the have-nots wanted to take what the haves had. Mr. Mandela had to keep peace, prevent a civil war. So Mr. Mandela's job was very, very, very difficult. Excuse me. But today, if Mr. Mandela was in power, there wouldn't be this greed and this corruption. Because when you steal from the government, you steal from the poor. Now people have stolen billions over years. Billions.
Yes.
They could have gone for the poor. They could have gone for the poor. Apartheid was bad, but we were going to overcome apartheid.
Yes.
But there were people who weren't interested in building up the country. They were more interested in building up themselves. So the poor and the shacks and the unemployment and the illiteracy
Yes.
can be placed at the door, first of all, of apartheid, yes. But now we have taken away the cause of that.
Yes.
Now we were to bring the cure. But many people among us undermine our efforts. And therefore people are still living in poverty. As I said, I said, there were freedom fighters of yesteryear
Yes.
who swore by the Freedom Charter, who
21.
today swear at the Freedom
Freedom
Charter
Charter.
because of their corruption. When you steal from the government, you steal from the poor. We've got millionaires and multimillionaires today. Where do they get money from? Some got it honestly,
Yes.
but some got it dishonestly.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yes. And maybe one of my two last questions. Your family background. When you went to prison, like the other chaps, were you married or?
No, I had 2 sons,
You had 2 sons.
but I wasn't married.
Okay.
I come from District 6.
Okay. Now I understand.
I was born in District 6. I come from a very poor family, very poor family. We were poor socially, economically, intellectually. I eventually got a standard 6 education, grade 8.
Yes.
Grade 8. I had to go to prison to get my education. In prison I got 2 degrees.
2?
I got 3 degrees.
3? Which one
But-
and which one?
But my third degree, my first degree was my third degree, and that I got from the security police. But the other 2 are academic degrees. Yes.
Okay.
So, so that is my background. I did all menial work, all menial jobs.
Okay.
And I had one ambition. I wanted to go whaling in the Antarctic because I read about it in the book. It was
Okay.
very exciting. So I to get sea experience, I joined the trawlers, fishing trawlers,
Okay.
and that was very hard work. But I got my sea experience after 8 months.
Okay.
I could join the whalers, and I joined the whalers, and I went to the Antarctica.
Yes.
I came back. Then I lost my job everywhere, couldn't get a job. Then I got a job in Namibia on the diamond mines.
Okay.
Then I left Namibia and I came back to South Africa and I became a photographer. That is my life,
Okay.
And then I went to jail and so on and so on and so
Okay.
on. And so that's my background. I come from a very poor family, very uneducated,
Yes. And like the other guys, especially Sally, her wife would come 3 times a year to visit. And people like Nelson Mandela, who were a top, an A-class prisoner, would get maybe 5 times or 4 times a month. What about you? How many times would you visit around?
You see, Mandela, we were first allowed 1 visit every 6 months
Okay.
because we were all in C classification.
Yes.
Madiba had all that.
Okay.
We were allowed 1 letter every 6 months,
Okay.
no more than 500 words. Madiba got all that.
Yes.
Now, to say Mandela got more visitors than Sunny means that he was being favoured. He wasn't favoured.
Yeah.
No.
Sure.
Mandela got a bed. Mr. Mandela got a bed. Sisulu got a bed.
Yes.
Kadrada got a bed and so on.
Yes.
All on doctor's orders.
Yes.
I never got a bed. I slept all my time on the floor. But you see, they didn't get a bed because they wanted the bed over us.
Yes.
Doctor's orders.
Yes.
Mandela didn't get extra visits because he was Mandela.
Yeah.
He was a prisoner.
Yeah.
And when Mandela, initially, he got the worst of the lot,
Yeah, sure.
Mandela. And so I got 1 visit every 6 months.
Okay.
And I only had my 2 brothers and my mother who could visit me. No one else could visit me.
Okay.
And then when I became, I don't know when I became big, suppose when I became CD, I may have got an extra visit to, I don't remember what visits I got.
sure.
But as time went by, things relaxed.
Yes.
We even were allowed to play tennis.
Okay.
When we first went to jail, we were not allowed to talk. It was silence. And we had a half an hour exercise in the morning, half an exercise in the afternoon.
Yes.
We were in the cells for 23 hours and there's nothing in our cells. We just sat in our cells 23 hours. So when Sunny and others came to jail, things were different.
Totally.
Things were different.
Yes.
And we owe I owe my education to the world because they put pressure on the South African government to allow us to study.
Yes.
South Africa is indebted to the world because the world supported us. Today South Africa is seen as the economic engine of Africa
Yes.
because of the world. If the world didn't support us, we'd still be fighting.
Yes.
The South African government was strong, was powerful. It would have been a war of attrition, we would have destroyed the country.
Yes.
When Mr. Mandela spoke to General Viljoen,
Yes.
and General Viljoen was going to bring out the White Army against us, Mr. Mandela pointed out to him, there'll be no winners.
Yeah.
You got the power, we've got the people. We'll destroy the country. There'll be no winners. So General June says, he'll join the negotiations. That saved us.
Yeah, sure.
De Klerk saved us by this unbanning,
Yes.
and Viljoen saved us.
Yes.
And otherwise it would have been a war.
Yes.
People wanted to fight. The whites, they had all the guns. They could blow up our gold mines, they blow up our harbors,
Yeah.
they would destroy our power stations.
Yes.
They would destroy the country. We would have had nothing. So, you see, we went to jail in 64.
Yeah.
It was bad. Bad. Others came to jail later.
Later.
I don't know, when did Sonny come to jail, Sonny? In
I think late 60s.
late 60s?
Yeah, late 60s.
Things started to improve, improve, And so people who came in the 76 crowd, they said, when they came, they says, and we were still got some restrictions. They told us, they says, how can you live like this? They don't know how we lived before. They don't know how we fought the government, we fought the authorities. We went on hunger strikes for improvement, which the people who came later benefited from. See, they didn't say how we lived. We slept on one mat on the cement floor with 3 dirty, stinking blankets. That's what we slept. The others came, they got blankets, they got this, they got that, and that. We fought for it. And the world put pressure on the government, So when it comes to visits,
You started at one.
you started one every 6 months. Now I had, and then after 5 years I became A, B, C, D. I became C.
Okay.
C. So entitled more visits. But 2 months later they put me down to D again because I kept an illegal diary. They found it, so they punished me. So that's just some people got a little bit here and some people got a little bit there,
Yes.
Those people who got beds, they got it for doctor's orders, and not that they were made special favors,
Yes, sure.
So as you say, Sonny got 3 visits a year. I don't know, maybe he was entitled to more, but it's a long distance to come.
Yeah, it's a long distance. He said it might have been because your
Expense.
wife, expense, because unlike other people, she would not travel by train.
Yeah.
She would fly.
Yes.
And it somehow was a constraint because she was the only breadwinner in
Yes,
the family.
yes.
Yeah.
It was expensive. And the Namibians, they never even saw their people. And but the International Red Cross, you see, only later, when Cowley House, I don't even know about Cowley House.
Yes, I know Kenyans.
When Cowley House came into being, when people could stay there free, when they organized lifts from the station for the people to take them to Cowley House where they stayed and then took them to the island,
Yes.
they organized it. The International Red Cross started to pay money for them, for a lift. That all came later.
Yes.
But in the early years, the people struggled, man. So there was no special favors,
Sure.
Madiba was Madiba.
Yes.
And Madiba was mocked man,
Yes.
If you step out of the line, Madiba gets it.
Sure.
See?
And I think Sonny said that you had a notion of saying no compromise. You will not compromise anything.
Who? Me?
Yeah, no.
Everybody.
The climate there would be no compromise to anything.
Depending on what compromise. When we were allowed to study,
Yes.
some said, we don't want to study. We don't want to see. Some said.
Yes.
Madiba and others, first they gave us this thing to sign.
Yes.
Madiba said, we don't sign that. That's too stringent. But later on they changed that so it was a bit easier,
Okay.
We signed. Those who said no studies, they came to study. Now, if I had to say no study and others had to say no study, I didn't. The others got studies before I got, But assuming we all said no studies, I'll still be Standard 6.
That's
stupid. Everyone who came to Robben Island illiterate, people on Transkei,
Yes.
they came to Robben Island illiterate. They left literate. I would teach people to read and write from the Bible. I would sit with the Transkeian people and I would teach them to read and write. Others taught me higher standards,
Yes.
Studying was a boon for us, because now no longer did we just sit in ourselves. We had something to do.
Yes.
We had something to talk about.
Yes.
We had something to do. We had something to talk about,
Yes.
We chased assignments.
Yes.
Time flew. Studies was a boon. So, compromised when we thought it was necessary. We didn't compromise just for fun.
Yes.
When it was necessary. Now, when we accepted the study privilege, it's a privilege.
Yes.
We accepted that privilege, And when the ministers came every month, the religious ministers,
Yes.
it's the only time we get some sun. We all go sit in the yard for the church service, you see.
Yes.
And then we would steal the ministers' newspaper,
Yes.
so on, But these are things you could say, we don't want it, we don't want to.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
But then we're making things worse for ourselves,
Okay.
You take, what's this, Judge Daneke? Yeah, Moseneke.
Yes. Yes.
He got his education in jail. Zuma got his education in jail. Zuma couldn't be president, he didn't get education in jail. And because we said we'll accept studies, there was we weren't letting the side down, we weren't betraying people, we weren't cutting our foot off just to spite. We wanted things which could improve us.
Yes.
Improve us. And people who came to jail illiterate, they went out of jail literate. So studies was a boon. It was actually a victory for us. But others said, don't study, no, no. And but others said, no, let's take it easy, Let's take it easy. It's like negotiations, Madiba, negotiations.
Yes.
Some say we don't negotiate, we go to Pretoria, we fight, blood.
Yes.
What's the result? No country. Today we got a beautiful South Africa.
Yes.
We respect us throughout the world. We got problems, but we had bigger problems in the past.
Yes.
If we had to fight and so on. You see, if we had to fight, people who got money can leave.
Yes.
The poor can't. All the people who left, I know people who yes, fight about it. Next day they're on the ship, going to England, going to Canada, going to Australia. They left. But they were the people who shouted at us, we're not militant enough, we're not doing enough. But when they took the opportunity, they left. Now, today, everybody's a freedom fighter. You see? When I speak to people, I say among the bravest of freedom fighters was the whites. The whites. My friend John Harris, he died on the gallows fighting apartheid. Mr. Mandela spoke there on jail when I can't remember his name. He died. Others were shot, assassinated. They didn't have to fight. They had all the privileges. They didn't have to fight. They were brave. Mandela, Sisulu, Kadrada, Mbeki, myself and others, we were black. We had a cause to fight. We were persecuted. The whites didn't. They were tortured in detention. They died in detention. They were assassinated. My pal was hung on the gallows. These are white people. Then you get all the blacks.
Yeah.
Today all blacks are freedom fighters. Yesterday they weren't. A lot of blacks were sellouts. The chiefs.
Yes.
Batanzima.
Yes.
And others.
Yes.
A lot of black police.
Sure.
A lot of. Now many of them, they needed the job. And many people cooperated with the police because the police said, if you don't cooperate, we take away your pass. We endorse you out. The guy's got his family here. He's got a job here. What does he do? Compromise, Rayram Slaba. He's dead. He's dead now.
The former.
Yes, from Port Elizabeth.
Yes, Premier.
He's a great guy. Raymond and Slaba. He had to go and fetch someone from across the border.
Yes.
When the police came to him, kaffa, what is that? Nee my baas, ek is daar, nee my baas, maar to further the struggle, he had to. Otherwise he goes to jail. And he couldn't pick up the people he's supposed to pick up. It was necessary at times. Necessary. You can't just go, yeah, you can shoot me, It wasn't that. It was, you study the situation and then you decide which is the best course. Which is the best course, And so there were many. The one chap was a Zulu. I forget his surname, his first name. Joshua Zulu.
Okay.
He was a school teacher. He was in F section.
Yes.
So he's going to be released, and he said, well, he'll go back to teaching. They said, how can you go work for the government? How can you go work for the government? I said, that guy was a school teacher before he came to jail. To become a freedom fighter, he had to survive. And he could only survive by becoming a school teacher. So now you say, must he die of hunger? Must he die of thirst? Let him teach, let him earn money. But on the side,
yes.
you do what you must do.
Yes.
You do what you do. You teach the children what is right. So, people want to put out their chest and be very brave. I've seen people who were very, very brave when in the early years, but when the government started to clamp down,
yes.
They left. They left with their families. And today they see high. But so they were very difficult days and difficult times, difficult times. And when you're tortured, you're alone.
Yes.
People get chucked out of the top buildings,
Yes.
And so, we can never judge a person. Never. You never know this person's circumstances, And friends of mine who escaped from the country, they said, now one chap, seven people were state witness against me. And the one chap, he was a top guy, he gave state evidence against me. But some of my friends escaped. They said they don't know how they would have behaved under torture. See, when you're under torture, different ball game, And some people, they're lucky, they can take it or break it or whatever. Others can't. Some people, they got a wife and 2, 3, 4 children. What's going to happen to my children? What's going to happen to my family, And they say, okay, we'll cooperate with the police, for the family's sake.
Yes.
Never judge a person.
Yes.
Never. If a person had given state evidence or given this and given that, I would never condemn him. Never. And I do not know his circumstances,
Yes.
So life wasn't easy.
Yes.
Life wasn't easy. We fought on the shoulders of our ancestors.
Yes.
The ancestors fought from 1652. They fought,
Yes.
and they died along the way. We were just lucky we came in at the end,
Yes.
when we defeated the apartheid government. So we survived.
Yes.
But if the world didn't come in, of course, we would have been dead. But so many heroes and heroines we don't know. Many unsung heroes and heroines we just don't know.
Yes.
I write in my book a tribute to the woman in the struggle. I've got a book there called There and Back. There I write a tribute to the woman in the struggle. Women, they battled. Their
Yes.
husbands were in jail, their sons in exile or something. They had to rear their children. They were brave. You don't hear of them.
Yes, that's true. Because we're discussing with Sunny's wife and other wives, especially Theo Chulo's wife, and she said You don't know what we went through. The
Correct.
husbands were no way. These children.
That's what I write about. I says, men's deeds are always acknowledged. Ladies' deeds are often overlooked. Overlook the ladies. I'll just give you an example of the past days, because I was
Yes, sir.
the past days. In the 40s and 50s,
Yes.
apartheid is powerful. Apartheid is just a sophistication of segregation. It's always there.
Yes, yes.
Always there. Huh? When a black child was born, that black child was inferior. When a white child was born, a white child was superior.
Yes.
Over hundreds of years. So apartheid just tightened up the situation. But black men, African men from the Transkei would come into the urban areas illegally. Because you could only come to the urban areas if you had a pass.
Yes.
If you got permission. And in the rural areas there was poverty. So the men come into the town illegally looking for work. They go to a building site because they got no education,
Yes.
they got no skills. So they go to a building site where they get a job. And they stand early in the morning there against the wall hoping the big boss will get a job. And the big boss come and he says, you and you. You don't ask him how much you're going to pay me. Oh, you're a clever gaffer. Footsack! You chased away like a dog. You humiliated. No job. You can't put food on the table. You swallow the insults. Compromise.
Yes.
You swallow the insults just to get a job, just to earn some money. Now, the wives of some of these men also come into the urban areas. They want to be with their husbands.
Yes.
They got their babies with them. The night, the men go sleep in the forest because they're here illegally.
Yes.
The wives go with their husbands into the forest with their babies. And when the babies cry, the other men tell the wives, get away, go away. The crying of your babies will draw the police to us. And then the ladies take the babies and they go away at night. They're carrying the danger with them.
Yes.
Carrying the danger with them. Women are brave, they're courageous, they're outstanding. So I write about
the women.
a tribute to the women. Just a chapter, nothing much. That I show how the woman, right at the bottom of the pile, how she suffered when during apartheid.
Yes.
And then lots of people, not only those who suffered, lots of people who helped, the people who made food for us, people who hid us away, people who covered us in many different ways. The black sash standing there, bravely defying the government, this group.
Was it overseas?
No, yeah. There are lots of whites.
Yes.
You had the black sash, the inner conscription campaign. The guys went to jail because they didn't want to join up with the army.
Yes, I remember those.
They were courageous people. They took courage. And churches, not all, but some churches were good. But there were many people who did things on the quiet. They're not known about. Not known. So if I'm not known, I'm in good company. Because there's lots of good people. The Mandelas are known, the Kathradas are known, Now, more people know Mandela than know Kathrada.
Yes.
More people know Kathrada than know me.
Yes.
But more people know me than Mr. Jones, you see?
Yes.